The last embers of civilization had flickered out years ago. What remained was a hollowed-out world, stripped of life, abandoned by time. Among the ruins stood the lone figure of a man, his name long since eroded by solitude, but his purpose unwavering. He was a watcher, a listener, the last voice of a world that had nothing left to say. Deep within a forgotten radio station nestled in the skeletal remains of a once thriving city, he kept the machines running. Static whispered in his ears, an endless ocean of silence, occasionally interrupted by phantom signals, glitches of the past, or echoes of something else. His hands trembled as he adjusted the dials, more out of habit than hope. He had sent thousands of messages, spoken into the void day after day, night after night, always waiting, always hoping. "This is transmission 0, his voice rasped, dry from disuse. "If there's anyone left, respond." Silence. It was always silence. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders. The flickering lights above him cast long, shifting shadows across the walls, their dance distorted by the dying generator's uneven hum. He reached for his journal, flipping through pages filled with the same plea, the same unanswered call. The ink was beginning to fade, just like his memories. Then the radio crackled. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but there's something beyond the endless void of static. A voice. "Do you remember?" His pulse thundered in his ears. The voice was unfamiliar, yet intimate, carrying an eerie sense of knowing. He leaned forward, gripping the microphone with trembling fingers. "Who is this?" he demanded. The silence stretched, long and suffocating. Then the voice returned, distorted, fractured, layered in whispers. "You forgot, but we remember." The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He scanned the empty room, his mind scrambling for an explanation. Was it interference? A trick of a mind starved for human contact? Or was it something else? A low hum vibrated through the station, deep and primal. The walls pulsed as if breathing, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally. The radio hissed, and then the voice spoke again. "Look outside." His stomach churned, but something deeper, some ancient, instinctual force, compelled him to obey. He hesitated before standing, moving toward the dust-covered window. He wiped away the grime with the sleeve of his worn jacket and peered out into the empty cityscape. But it wasn't empty. Figures stood in the streets below, hundreds of them, motionless, silent, their faces turned upward, staring directly at him. Their features were blurred, indistinct, shifting like smoke in a breeze. His breath hitched. His hands trembled. "No," he whispered. The radio emitted a piercing shriek, cutting through his skull like a blade. He clutched his head, sinking to his knees as the lights flickered wildly. The walls convulsed, and the very air felt thick, pressing against him, suffocating. "You forgot," the voice repeated, now inside his mind, inside his bones. "You were one of us." Memories he did not recognize flooded his mind. A life he did not recall. Images of a world before the silence, before the stillness. The city was never empty. He had never been alone. The figures outside began to move. They did not walk. They did not run. They shifted. One moment, they were at the street below. The next, they were closer, then closer, flickering like images on a failing screen. Each time they moved, the space between them and the station diminished, impossibly fast, impossibly silent. A shadow stretched across the floor behind him. He turned, his heart hammering in his chest. Something stood in the doorway. Not a man, not a thing. A void in the shape of a person, darker than the surrounding darkness. Its presence bent the air, warped the very fabric of the space around it. It reached out a hand. "Come back to us." The radio screeched. The world fractured. The station crumbled into nothingness. And then silence. Somewhere across the endless static, a new voice crackled through the void. This is transmission 0. If there's anyone left, respond. But this time, something answered. The static swelled, growing louder, layered with whispers too many to discern. Shapes flickered in the room, just on the edge of perception, shifting and bending the walls like a mirage. The signal pulsed, rhythmic, alive. You left us, the voice accused, colder now, tinged with something almost human. But you cannot leave again. Elias stumbled backward. The walls pulsed, stretching into endless corridors, their dimensions impossible. The radio console distorted, its knobs twisting in directions they shouldn't. His journal lay open on the desk. The ink moved. Words formed on the page, written by an unseen hand. We never left. A guttural noise resonated from behind him, and he turned too slowly. The void figure was inches away, its face, or the absence of one mere breaths from his own. His mind rebelled against its presence, unable to comprehend the sheer emptiness of it. His mouth opened to scream, but the sound never came. The radio clicked on its own. This is transmission 0, his own voice repeated from the speaker. If there's anyone left, respond. A whisper slid through the air. You were never here. But this time, the whisper did not fade. It grew. It spread through the room like mist, curling around Elias, filling the space, pressing against his skin. The station walls groaned under the weight of something unseen. The static became voices, thousands of them, all whispering his name. The figures outside the station no longer flickered. They solidified. The shadow in the doorway moved forward. It didn't walk. It bled into the room, the space around it warping as if reality itself rejected its presence. Elias felt his own form flickering, his body caught between moments, between existence and absence. The last thought he had before the darkness swallowed him was not one of fear, but of recognition. He had never been the last survivor. He had always been one of them. A new presence filled the radio waves, something deeper than static, something waiting. The voice returned, more familiar now, more like his own. This is transmission 0. It whispered, and we are still here. We are always here. The signal did not fade. It grew stronger.